Warning, there will be spoilers for Episode 9 of the Star Wars Andor series, and really, the whole show up to this point. If you haven't seen it, proceed with caution. You have been warned. Episode 9 of the Star Wars Andor series is out, and we are no closer to knowing what Cassian Andor, Melshi, and the other inmates of Narkina 5 are building. There have been a lot of theories and speculations as to what it could be. I myself have created a video saying it may be a probe droid. But as I watched the episode again and spent countless hours studying the piece, it's too large to be the undercarriage of a probe droid. Not to mention the dangling arms of the probe droid are of different sizes and uses. As we see from the components Andor is building, the 6 appendages are symmetrical. So yeah, I was wrong. I admit it, and that's okay. There are literally hundreds of theories out there about what they could be building. So instead of talking about all those theories and discussing them, I'll just use the most popular ones. The popular theory on the item is that it is either the support structure of the Death Star, and another popular theory suggests that the Narkina 5 inmates are building the TIE fighter parts, specifically the center of the wing. Other lesser-known theories include AT-AT or AT-AT feet and the structures which hold TIE fighters in place in a hangar on a Star Destroyer or ground base. But I'm going to explain why, if it is any of these things, it shouldn't be the case. And before anyone says anything, I am really getting into the Andor series, more than I thought I would. I also am loving the theories everyone is posting in the comments, and I'm not hating on them at all. It's great brain work, so thank you for that. With that said, let's start off with the theory that Andor is building the Death Star structural pieces making up the sphere we all know and love. First, we look at the timeline. The Andor series takes place 14 years after the fall of the Republic and the Jedi Order. This is 5 years prior to the events of Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, and A New Hope. As we see in Rogue One, the Death Star shell is complete. The remaining piece to install is the massive focus laser. That means the superstructure or spherical shape and all inner components has finished the construction phase. How do I know the inner workings are complete? Because after the focus laser is put in place, we see the Imperial officers aboard the Death Star ready for trials. Not just the higher ranks, but there are also weapons technicians, navigational specialists, and everything between settled in to spread fear throughout the galaxy. But let's go back to Revenge of the Sith for just a moment, as it is crucial to understanding how long it took to build the floating bowl of death. It can be argued that we don't know the timeline of the scene where Darth Vader, Emperor Palpatine, and Grand Moff Tarkin are watching the construction of the armored space station from their Star Destroyer, at the end of Revenge of the Sith, that is. However, there is one clue that tells us that this isn't very long after the rise of the Empire. The main clue: Tarkin is much younger, and in this scene we see the support structure almost complete. The support structure. The outer shell panels are in the beginning stages and are sporadically present as well, so that means that it has taken them roughly 15 years to be at a stalemate in the shell construction. If we are to believe Andor is building Death Star structural parts, give or take a few years, of course. Then within 5 years, they get it all finished, moving into Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, and A New Hope. It seems unlikely that they built it in 5 years, as the only complaint before those two awesome movies was that the planet-killing focus beam had not been designed to completion due to lack of technology. But I guess it is possible. Funding disputes for different projects may have slowed production as well, especially since we know that around 3 years prior to A New Hope, Grand Admiral Thrawn was trying to get funding for his TIE Defender program, and that meant taking away from Project Stardust, or the Death Star. So it's possible that the Death Star took a decade to get over that hump of stalemate, but the size of the Death Star tells us differently. How long does it take us to build a high-rise? A year? 2 years? And that's only 1,000 feet tall or so, on average for the United States cities. Imagine building a small moon in the same allotted time. Okay, enough with the timeline. Let's look at the piece Cassian Andor is building on Narkina 5 to see how feasible it is to include it in the construction of the superstructure. It has 6 extensions from the center. This would allow attachments from 6 other pieces. If a beam were attached to each end, 6 more of those components could be added to those beams, and the structure grows from there, forming a sphere if needed. Plausible. But there's a problem with the design of these components that Cassian Andor and the other inmates are building: pinned hinge joints. Each of these 6 extended arms have extensions attached to them by pinned hinge joints, meaning each arm is able to be positioned independently of each other. That creates structural issues that we know aren't present in the Death Star. What do I mean by that? Okay. If these items are in fact the support structure for the hull, that means the entire sphere is either mechanized to expand and contract like a Hoberman sphere. If you don't know what that is, it's a toy created by a Harvard professor that expands and contracts. It's a sphere that begins small in its original form, then expands when a pulling motion is applied. And we know the Death Star doesn't have that capability due to the outer shell not having room to expand and contract. Also, why would that be added into the Star Wars lore by the Andor series when it was never discussed before? It seems game-changing for no reason. Simple. The Death Star doesn't grow nor shrink. I could also mention that joints such as this wear out faster than solid portions of a structure. What goes out first, your vehicle's frame or the shocks and struts? Moving parts deteriorate faster, and replacing these items, which are attached to an outer hull, would be a financial nightmare, not to mention how time-consuming it would be. Now, maybe these joints are supported and won't expand. That creates 2 other issues. Why make joints at all? The cost of making these highly machined and tolerance-driven parts is too high just to be made static, or useless as joints. The other issue is cost, where these joints would cost roughly 5 times the amount to make just for them to be static makes no sense. 6 solid arms would make more sense for a solid shell structure, and it would be far more cost effective. Again, funding seemed to be an issue per Star Wars Rebels. So, it's simple. These aren't Death Star structural pieces. But that isn't saying they can't be parts making up the inner core, but that would be finished in construction at this time already. Yes, 15 years after beginning construction, most of the main elements of the Death Star outer structure and inner structure would be complete, with just the detailed workings of the interior needing completed, such as mess halls, barracks, or galleys, if you're more familiar with naval terms, and bulkheads. Think of it like this. As time-consuming as it would have been to build the exterior, it would have taken much longer to build the interior. And if Cassian Andor learns that this is the Death Star, it kind of takes away from the whole surprise to the rebellion that the Death Star even exists. That is in Rogue One. But again, that isn't saying it is not the Death Star. I'm just saying it makes no sense for it to be Death Star in practical terms. Sure, it would be poetic for Cassian Andor to be building the superstructure that killed him and Jyn Erso in Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, but it just seems irrational. Okay, the next theory as to what Cassian Andor and company are building on Narkina 5 is that of TIE Fighter wing components. A TIE Fighter wing does have 6 panels, and these pieces would be about the right size and shape for the center of the wings. And we have seen TIE Fighters fold their wings for ground landings, so the pinned hinge joints may be of use to the TIE Fighter structure. But again, there's an issue with this. As the prison components do have 6 structural arms that would fit a TIE Fighter wing, all the arms are hinged, all of them. That makes 3 sets of 2 hinges when applied to the Empire's standard fighter, but TIE Fighter wings only fold in half. 4 hinges are all that it requires. That leaves 2 of the hinges useless and unnecessary. Now, I'm not saying that these parts can't be that of a TIE Fighter, but it seems unlikely to make 6 joints when only 4 are needed. So, another unlikely theory, if we are going to keep up with established Star Wars lore and continuity. Okay, moving on to the next theory. Next up, the apparatus which hinges TIE fighters from the ceilings of hangars in Star Destroyers and ground air bases. It's unlikely that it would be these, the hanging apparati, you know what I'm talking about. They're clamps which hold the fighters in by the inner wing arms and not from the outer wing center. The last theory suggests that Cassian Andor is forced to produce AT-AT or AT-AT walker feet. For that to be the case, there are a couple of issues with it as well. First is the size. These components are much too small to be that of an Imperial walker's feet. In The Empire Strikes Back, we get a size comparison of the walker's foot next to Luke Skywalker. The foot covers his T-47 snowspeeder entirely, or airspeeder in other circumstances. The second issue is that the Imperial walkers only have 4 hinged toes, not 6, one coming out from each side of the foot. The toes don't hinge until just outside the foot. As I explained before, there are 6 hinges on the components that Cassian Andor is building in the Star Wars Andor series, so it doesn't make sense for them to be AT-AT walker feet structure. I won't be upset if any of these theories are correct, but it will kind of make me scratch my head for the reasons listed above. Established Star Wars lore and continuity. I know I sound cynical about these theories, but I actually think they're all great ideas, and I am in no way knocking anyone for speculating on the Andor series, nor any other Star Wars project, especially since we have very little clues as to what it is actually being built on Narkina 5. I admit that my own probe droid theory is also flawed, but as I said, it's fun to craft a theory. If it's wrong, no harm, no foul. I don't know anyone at Lucasfilm nor Disney. I'm not friends with Tony Gilroy, and I really don't think any of them have even seen any of my videos, and that's okay. I'm not one of those who thinks my theories are the best ideas, and I won't be mad if they don't use these ideas. Like I said, they don't watch my videos. I just like enjoying Star Wars, and I'm really loving the Andor series. I know I say that a lot, but it's a huge surprise to me because I wasn't specifically enthused for this show when it was announced. I thought, why? And that's the same thing I thought when Solo: A Star Wars Story was announced. Why? But now, even though I still don't understand why Andor was chosen for its own series, other than Rogue One: A Star Wars Story was badass, I'm glad they did. So keep those Star Wars theories coming. I'd love hearing them. Even if I try to argue a little bit, it's all in good fun, and we're here for the same purpose. We love Star Wars. And who could hate that? This is Gerald from Star Wars Fanatics signing off, wishing you all great health, happiness, and peace. Thank you all for watching, and remember, this is the way, the only way.